Hello, everybody. This is Jared Davidson with Seoul Semiconductor, otherwise known as JD. I appreciate everyone taking the time to join this webinar today. I've been with Seoul Semiconductor for 2 years. I am head of the Americas for our lighting LED division. So I am overseeing all sales, marketing, and operations for the Americas. Prior to Seoul, I've been in lighting for over a decade, so I've been around. As I mentioned, I appreciate everybody joining the webinar today. I appreciate our global partner, Future Electronics, for helping us put this on. Briefly, I'll give you a little bit of the rundown about what we're going to discuss. There's a lot of new trends and what we like to call the new normal in both LEDs and in the lighting industry. We're kind of in a unique environment, in a unique situation with the global pandemic that we're all experiencing right now. This pandemic, I believe, has exposed and accelerated a lot of these trends and things that are evolving in our industries. So what we're going to do is discuss those today and discuss how Seoul has products and capabilities that align very well with this new normal. So what I'd like to do is give a quick background on the company Seoul Semiconductor, and then we'll talk about a little bit more about the new normal more specifically. So Seoul Semiconductor is about a 30-year-old LED company. Unlike a lot of our competition in the LED marketplace, we are an LED company. So we do not have a bunch of other business units that we fall back on or that we're funded by or that we fund with our LED business. We are strictly a semiconductor company, and this is what we do. This is our core competency. So everything that you're going to see on this slide and future slides, this is our business. There's really nothing else behind the curtain. So roughly 30-year-old company, 2018 sales over $1 billion, essentially flat since 2018, which in many situations may be construed as negative. However, in the LED industry, LED specific revenues, I would say it's a pretty positive thing. So much of our competition cannot say that their LED business has remained flat over the last several years. Most of them will say that it's gone down. Can also say that specifically to the Americas, year over year, despite the headwind challenges that we're all facing, we are actually up significantly year over year in the lighting space. We're a profitable company. Depending on where you look at your LED rankings and what year you look at your LED rankings, we are number 4 when you include captive markets and number 2 when you exclude captive markets. So we're a significant player, of course. And the two most important things likely from this slide, besides the fact that we are only an LED company, are the fact that we have roughly, close to 15,000 patents that we're very proud of, that I'll discuss a little bit more detail later. And bigger than that, more than 10% of our annual revenues every year are directed into R&D activities focused on LED. So again, there's a lot of companies out there that talk about their investment in research and development as a percentage of their annual revenue. However, being a LED company and a semiconductor company, you can rest assured that our investment in R&D specifically drives our innovation in it. So it's not like this $100 million or more is being redirected into a separate business unit that has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about today. So a couple key important facts that you want to take away from this particular slide. This is a brief timeline of the company overview with a few key milestones in our organization's history. So again, established in 92, you'll see a couple other milestones here: 2002 Nitride, 2005 SETI, 2014 NASA, and 2017 LED Inside rankings. This is related to Seoul's semiconductor sister company, Seoul Viosys. So we're all under the same umbrella. We do corroborate internally, but we are operational separately. So Seoul Semiconductor is not only a LED company for visible LED, but we are also, as ranked in 2017, the largest UV LED manufacturer market share-wise globally as well. So that's another key point, specifically given today's environment with the pandemic. There's a lot of attention being drawn to our LED UV portfolio. Lastly, more recently in 2018, we received quite a bit of global recognition, and we continue to receive it for our SunLike sun spectrum LEDs, which I'll talk about later. It's really become synonymous with Seoul Semiconductor. So if you know SunLike, you know Seoul, and if you know Seoul, for sure you know our SunLike, something we're pretty proud of, and we'll get into in a bit. In terms of what industries and segments we function in, pretty much anything where you need an LED. So lighting is what we're going to primarily discuss today. We actually got our start in backlighting and mobile, so this is a core competency of our business. It's part of our important history. So again, there's a lot of technology that is piggybacked off of the backlighting and mobile industries. We're a player in automotive, and as I mentioned before, UV, extremely important. So UVA, BC, component level, module level, and although Seoul Semiconductor is strictly a B2B component supplier, because of market demands lately and requests from some of our partners, we are exploring a little bit into B2C just in the UV sector in terms of a personalized air purifier and sterilizer, which I'll mention briefly later in this PowerPoint presentation. So something we're, again, a little bit different, but an outcome of the current environment. So as I mentioned in the first slide, IP is one of our core competencies, something our Chairman Lee, is extremely proud of. IP is kind of an ethos at Seoul Semiconductor. Many of you familiar with our company have absolutely heard us discuss this or have seen us talk about this publicly. We feel that IP not only protects us as a manufacturer and as an innovator, but it also protects our customers, and even maybe more importantly than that, it protects the future of innovation. So Chairman Lee believes strongly that IP protects those younger up and coming inventors and innovators that want to create something different. Without IP, there's not a lot of motivation to create something that can just be stolen from you and somebody else to profit from it. So you'll see that we're still very active in litigation. We've had successful litigations all over the world, mostly involving downstream distributors and suppliers, again, to protect our customer base. Many of you know, particularly in the US, that the import business on OEM and ODM type product has significantly impacted price. It's created a lot of price erosion. We've lost a lot of share jointly, I think, due to that. And much of that is because of IP infringement. And our IP covers a lot of different things. So we're a vertically integrated company. So our IP covers that. We cover everything from the EPI to the package to modules to even in some cases driver as well. So something we're very proud of, something we're very active in, not necessarily for profit for our organization, but for the better good of all of our collective industry. Seoul is also fairly unique in terms of our global footprint. First thing to draw attention to is the fact that we have, of course, subsidiaries and local offices all over the world. The other key point is our local R&D labs. So we're not just a manufacturer, we're not just a board house. In many cases, we also act as a design partner and an engineering partner for our customer base. So I sit in Atlanta, for example. We have a sphere here, we have a lab here, we have an engineer here, actually a couple of engineers here. So we're always working to add value at the local level as well as in our headquarters and our manufacturing facilities. The other key note is the fact that, of course, we have the US, China, Vietnam, and Korea. We are a Korean company headquartered in Ansan, 60 to 90 minutes outside of Seoul, depending on the lovely traffic over there. But one key note is our large facility in Vietnam, which I'm going to discuss in more detail. So we established a Vietnam footprint several years ago. We actually broke ground a long time ago on a massive facility there. One of the bigger trends we see in our industry is the migration into Southeast Asia, particularly from China, which of course is for a bunch of different reasons. In the US, of course, it's tariff driven. There's been a lot going on that we'll talk about here in a second, but Seoul Semiconductor is pretty unique in the fact that we were well ahead of the curve and we started placing our footprint in Vietnam roughly 4 to 5 years ago. So in terms of our Vietnam facility, it's not just a little shack somewhere. It's pretty extensive. It's 130,000 square meters of land area, roughly 60,000 square meters of floor area. It is a substantial footprint there, and we continue to add to it. So I can say on a quarterly basis at least, we're continuing to add capacity, we're continuing to add resources, and we're continuing to build up this facility. It is not just manufacturing. We have R&D located there, we have test labs located there, we have customer service located there, and we have some ops teams located there as well. This has allowed us to be very flexible with our customers, not only in terms of tariff for the United States, but also in terms of just manufacturing flexibility, vertical integration, as well as innovation, cost effectiveness, and things of that nature. So we're very proud of our Vietnam facility. It is a flagship facility for us. Many of our customers choose to visit Vietnam and maybe not even visit our headquarters anymore in Ansan. So we will talk about our capabilities there in a second a little bit more. But again, something to take a big note of. It's not just LED package coming from here. It's also module, it's also engine, it's also die. So with that background, let's talk about the new normal. As mentioned briefly in the very beginning, this pandemic, I believe, has exposed a lot of the good and a lot of the bad for all of us collectively. So there's been a lot of weaknesses and a lot of strengths exposed during this. Lines down, product availability, quality issues, product line, competitiveness, all of those things I think have been exposed in part due to the pandemic. It's also accelerated a lot of change that was already occurring prior to the pandemic. So let's just dive into a little bit more about what I'm talking about. First thing, China and the US. This is kind of old news at this point, but a couple years ago, the rhetoric really turned up and we had some tariffs implemented. The tariffs grew and they grew and they grew till eventually they had a pretty substantial impact on our industry. So on LEDs, on modules, on bulbs, on fixtures, you name it, our industry felt the burden of these tariffs. In the LED specific industry, component industry, it was for a long time looked at by some of our competition as just a nuisance that was going to be quickly passing and go away on its own. So some of our competition who had country of origin packages, for example, out of China, decided, hey, you know what, no big deal. We'll foot the bill for you on these tariffs. And when it's all over, we'll get back to life as normal. Well, of course, that has not been the case. The tariffs have not gone anywhere. The rhetoric has only grown stronger. This pandemic has not helped calm that at all. I think it's been a little bit more fuel on the fire. So, one of the key things that's evolved is when we first started selling LEDs, all of us in this industry are buying LEDs or using LEDs. Country of origin was only discussed in terms of, supply chain, maybe logistics type conversation. Country of origin now has evolved into more of a financial C-level type of decision, not only because of tariffs, but for other factors as well. But of course, the financial impact of buying an LED or a board with a 25% tariff, it's a big deal. And the same thing goes for a fixture. The margins in everybody's industry, I believe, are fairly slim. And there's not a whole lot of people out there who can afford to eat 25% on their component level purchases. So across the entire ecosystem of a light fixture, it's become pretty important. With Seoul's, manufacturing and availability in Korea and Vietnam, we've been able to pretty much sidestep a lot of this tariff with packages and modules both coming from locations outside of China. So again, it's been a pretty big added benefit for us. IP, which we discussed earlier, is also a growing trend. As mentioned, the infringement of IP has provided a lot of price erosion into our respective marketplaces. Many of these ODM type import products that we see that we compete against at the fixture level, all of us are using LEDs, drivers, and other components that infringe on IP across a variety of different platforms, a variety of different people's IP. One of the things we hear now from our customers is, hey, Seoul Semi, our customer says that our manufacturer that we buy this high bay from in China says that they use all your LEDs and the fixtures that we buy. Can you please confirm that for us? Unfortunately, oftentimes when we check, it's not the case, right? So this is a problem not just for Seoul Semiconductor, it's also a problem for our competitors that also respect IP. It's a big problem, and oftentimes it's used to have the ODM gain an advantage, or even the OEM gain an advantage in terms of cost. They use a lower cost package that has no IP on it. They throw it in a fixture, they ship it over to the US, they ship it over somewhere else, and nobody asks any questions 9 times out of 10. So they're able to undercut all the pricing because, you know what, they're not having to pay for that R&D. They're not having to pay for that innovation. And it's become a big problem not only for the component industry, it's a big problem downstream as well, because as mentioned, they're able to basically shortcut everything and offer their finished goods at a much lower price. So again, Seoul's IP and our ability to trace everything into Asia has been extremely helpful for the US. Flexible manufacturing, big issue that's come up. We have the tariff issue, which is a country of origin issue, right? That's kind of a separate additional thing in terms of flexible manufacturing. This virus has also exposed a lot of flaws in the manufacturing overseas. So there's been line down problems. There's been line downs in China. There's been line down problems in Mexico for suppliers of components. Seoul Semiconductor, with our facilities in Korea, China, and Vietnam, have been able to pivot we had an extremely limited impact due to the pandemic. So even in the height of the pandemic in Asia, our supply was extremely limited in terms of the impact it had to us or to our customers. Unfortunately, switching LEDs or modules is not the same as switching a screw, so it's not necessarily something you can do on the fly. But for those who did have that ability, we were often called to try to help fill that gap, both domestically and abroad. The other portion of flexible manufacturing outside of the pandemic and having multiple facilities is just the fact that in the US specifically, there's not a lot of companies now investing in SMT. They're not investing in additional real estate. They don't want that overhead. They're not seeing the throughput that they did in before. The other factor is everybody at one point thought they had their own special sauce inside their linear light engines or their light engines, and they wanted to do it themselves in their own factory. In a lot of cases, people are finding out more and more, you know what, it's becoming a little bit of a commodity, maybe unfortunate for Seoul Semi and other component suppliers, but at the same time, because of that, they're saying, hey, let's have our own percentage of in-house manufacturing, or let's limit our in-house manufacturing investment and cost, and let's outsource some of these modules and light engines. And that's where Seoul Semis really come into play. We do quick turnaround stuff in terms of quotations, in terms of prototypes. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but we're basically allowing customers to have another manufacturing arm. And lastly, evolving applications. So as the applications have evolved, so has the demand on the components, right? Before we had your typical troughers and your area lights and your wall packs and things of that nature. We're hearing more and more about things like horticulture, buzzwords like, human-centric lighting. So because of that, we're having to evolve our offering and our product capability as well. Additionally, with all the price pressure and some of the trends that hit Asia first and make their way overseas to the US, we're having people say, hey, I need better value, but I cannot sacrifice performance and I cannot sacrifice reliability. So that puts pressure on us to innovate. So again, it's not like the rat race of the LPW, the lumen per watt race, maybe in the early to mid 2000s, but there is innovation happening in terms of reliability, in terms of efficiency, in terms of value, and in terms of application. With that being said, what I'm going to get into here is an overview at some of our product that kind of is relative to this conversation that we're talking about. So the first few slides I'm going to show are the industry verticals that we work in. It's pretty much everything in relation to general lighting. So you're going to see a key factor and an SSC solution in green. This is by no means comprehensive. There's a ton of overlap across all these verticals, and the menu that I have is just too big to show in one PowerPoint slide. So for residential, we often see higher voltage packages. In some cases, we see higher lumen per watt requirements. Higher CRI requirements, omnidirectional lighting in terms of bulbs and things of that nature. So Seoul Semi is well positioned in the residential side of the business. So we have filament bulbs, we have high LPW LEDs, we have multi-junction LEDs with higher voltage and higher output for cost. And of course, we also have AC driver solutions as well that's not on this slide. So Seoul is very much in line with the residential sector. The commercial sector, again, growing, constantly growing. It drives the majority of the volume in the US because there's very limited bulb and residential production here. So commercial and industrial absolutely drives the majority of the production in terms of volume here. We hear buzzwords like lighting quality. We hear buzzwords like health enhancement, human-centric lighting. Again, SunLike is one of those areas that we play in terms of having a solution that is directed towards quality and human-centric lighting. In terms of high reliability, you have your kind of antique 5630 packages that are kind of going away now. Still popular, but slowly being replaced by 3030, which absolutely makes up the majority of the commercial volume, especially in the United States. You have Y-Cop, which is our CSP solution, which I'll show a little bit later. And you have 2835s, or as Seoul calls them, 3528s. I can already hear, even though everybody's on mute, a lot of questioning as to how a 3528 could be associated with reliability. I'll show you that in a couple slides. Industrial and horticulture, again, we have everything from customers demanding full spectrum LEDs to basically mimic the sun. For horticulture, we've seen that a lot with leafy greens. There's a lot of data, and customers have data to back that up in terms of growth for leafy greens. We're having, of course, the high reliability issue for industrial. So you see 3030 really becoming a big deal, particularly the 3030 with the flip chip, as there's no wire bond, which we'll talk about again in more detail. And then it's still the LPW race. So, 3030s, 2835s, 5050s now becoming a trend in the US, which is coming over from overseas. So there's a lot of things happening there. And lastly, in terms of outdoor, the key factors: uniformity, reliability, and of course, LPW. So we're going to dive into each one of these product categories on the right in a little bit more detail. That's why I'm not spending much time on it. So let's just go ahead and talk about that right now. In terms of 3030s, as I mentioned, by far the highest volume footprint for commercial lighting globally, definitely in the US as well. It has basically started to take the place of all the 5630 type business that's been out there for several years. And we kind of separate our 3030s into two groups. So on the left, we have the 3030B, which is more of a conventional 3030. It uses our IP, our flagship chip solution, high reliability EMC, and it is adopted globally by big time lighting companies. It goes from about 195 LPW to 205 LPW, what I'm showing today. Again, this is no means 100% of our product offering, but this is some of our flagship product. And it's a conventional LED. It's a great value. It's great performance. It's a conventional LED. It's high volume. It's out there. Many of our competitors have something similar. Again, good or bad, let's be honest, we're in a bit of a commodity marketplace. I would say a conventional 3030 fits that bill. All right. So that's your conventional 3030. 3030C is a little bit different. So the 3030C uses our proprietary Y-COP flip chip inside of a 3030 package. All right. So there's no wire bond. What that does, aside from allowing for the great performance, which I'll talk to in a second, in terms of reliability, the thermal shock is fantastic. The anti-sulfur properties, the anti-moisture properties, which I'll show graphs on here in a second, are fantastic as well. What everybody's really interested in typically off the bat is the performance. As you can see, we have kind of three camps that we put these 3030Cs into. We have a standard version that's around 210, kind of a more premium version that's 220 LPW with an R9 positive, and then an R9 negative that adds a little bit more efficacy. Some people may ask, why do you have an R9 negative CRI80? Pretty simple answer. In other parts of the world, not necessarily the United States, the R9 value is not a requirement. The efficacy is much more advantageous to the marketplace than the R9 value. So we have made the R9 negative. It's also a big benefit when you're looking at micromoles, for example, instead of just the LPWs. So for horticulture, an R9 negative is pretty important. So in terms of reliability, the first graph up top is high temperature and high humidity. And this is against one of our competitors. This is against a similar type package. So we're not the only person on the block with something along this lines. And this is a test against that particular product. Again, we show a significant better performance in terms of high temperature and high humidity. The bottom is sulfur. So in terms of the sulfurization, we're almost 10% better than this same competitor. So there is a difference. Seoul is doing a great job in terms of reliability, in terms of performance with the 3030C. It is the trend in 3030. Is it going to give you your lowest lumen per dollar per watt cost? Depends how you use it, but not necessarily, right? It's definitely not what we would call the value end of the equation in mid-power packages, but there's a lot of value if you're looking for that extended reliability and that fantastic performance. As I mentioned, there's a bunch of thermal shock benefits as well. I just don't have a graph on this PowerPoint, but it's of course available upon request. The next big one, 2835, or as we call them, 3528, because we like to be different. This package itself, highest volume package globally, has been forever. That's because of its use in bulb, in tube, its low cost functionality for those products that's several years old, right? For a long time, 2835s had a very negative reputation in terms of performance and reliability. Again, a lot of that relates to the fact that they were packages that were developed and maybe supplied by lower tier manufacturers for cheap A lamps or things of that nature. And they were made out of PPA material, not PCT like we see today. Their performance was subpar, their lifetime was subpar, etc. That has changed a lot, right? It's 100% a new trend, not only for residential lighting applications, the trend is now for commercial lighting applications. So again, my menu on 2835s it's like Baskin Robbins, right? So every flavor that you can possibly imagine. We have here our flagship parts. So as you can see, just from the performance, 200 lumen per watt to 215 lumen per watt on the left-hand side. Extremely cost competitive, a great value, and fantastic performance. Again, making its way into everything from troughers to panels to strips, etc. Now, one of the things I alluded to earlier is how can you call a 2835 high reliability? Well, they're 100% getting better, as I mentioned, moving to PCT, but we're also innovating. So the S version of our 3528 contains a gold wire bond. This gold wire bond is extremely important because it helps against thermal shock and sulfur protection. So what it's able to do, and I'll show a graph in a second, is give substantial performance benefits when you're talking about thermal shock, when you're talking about cycling. As you can see, the performance is still pretty good, 188 to 206 LPW. There's a slight delta versus the non-gold wire bond, so we do lose about 2%, but the benefits are pretty big. So let's look at the thermal shock graph on the top here. As you can see, compared to more of a conventional 2835, you start to see a dip after 400 to 500 hours in terms of the failure ratio on that conventional 2835 in blue. So 900 cycles is when you start to see a dip on the orange. And after 400, you start to see a dip on the blue. So again, tremendous benefit on thermal shock. You have aux sensor set up. There's going to be cycling going on. It's in more of a high demand environment. This gold wire is pretty important. Sulfur, it's kind of the icing on the cake. So this was designed mostly for the advantages on thermal shock, but it also has advantage on sulfur. So it's roughly 5% better than your conventional 2835. So again, we are innovating. We are finding ways at a great value to provide not only the LPW, the lumen per watt requirements that everybody has, but also to meet those reliability requirements that everybody has. The next package we're going to talk about is the 50/50. You know, in terms of a trend, I would say the United States is far behind the rest of the world on the 50/50. This has been very active in Asia, this has been active in Europe, and this has been very active in Latin America and South America for a long time in outdoor and area lights, and also industrial high bay and things of that nature. We're just now starting to see companies in the US adopt this 50/50 package. Canopy lighting, area lighting, outdoor, high bay, industrial. We're starting to see the adoption here in the US. I don't know if it's driven primarily about the fact that all these import products are giving all the engineers in the US some ideas about what to use, or if everybody's just now catching up on the technology. But essentially, the value and the performance that a 50/50 adds is pretty impressive. So from a cost perspective, it has significant advantages over a traditional high power, such as a conventional 3535. From a performance advantage, as you can see just from this one slide, depending on how you drive it, you know, over 200 lumens per watt. So obviously you'll notice it's flat on top. It doesn't have a dome like a conventional 3535. So optics are always a factor in specific outdoor applications. But if you can get around that, this is a great value, and it's 100% becoming a trend in the US. So in terms of Seoul, just a quick slide. A few other companies offer 50/50 style packages similar to ours. Our performance is still pretty good. It's superior compared to most. So we're pretty proud of it. As I mentioned, gaining a lot of traction, and this is definitely a trend in outdoor and area lighting for customers to reduce the cost and improve the performance of their fixtures. So lastly, for the conventional type stuff, we're going to talk about outdoor, and that's YCOP 3535s too. So our YCOP package is essentially Seoul Semi's version of a chip scale package, or CSP. We don't really like to use that term. We think it's a little bit different because there's really no package. It is a 5-sided emitter. We have different flavors, different shapes, different sizes, I should say. So we go down to a 1.1 by 1.1 millimeters, so really small. Gives you a ton of lumen density, design flexibility, LPW, thermal shock performance because it's a flip chip die. So there's a lot of benefit to it. The other thing that we do is we also have versions such as the Y22P, which you can see on your screen. That's on a 3535 substrate. So maybe it's to help with the Z height, maybe it's to help with the pad. You already have a layout, you already have an optic design. There's that. Additionally, these are 5-sided emitters, but we also have not pictured a single-sided top emitting Y22T as in Tom. So it has a TiO2 sidewall. It's a top emitting device. It can benefit those that are in favor of trying to work with an existing optic and they don't really want to use the 5-sided emitter. I will tell you internally, when we talk to our own engineers and our own R&D guys about using the Y22T or top-sided emitter versus the 5-side, they hate us and they think that it's because we're just not using the optics right. So basically the messaging is if you design around the 5 side and you do it properly, you'll get the most benefit and you'll perform superior to the top side emitter. On the right hand side, we have the YCOP conventional 3535. So one of the trends inside Seoul Semi is to use our YCOP flip chip technology inside different packages. So as I mentioned earlier, the 3030C mid power. And on this slide, you see the 3535 conventional. This is, again, very conventional. Most of our competition has a 3535. It allows for pretty good performance, pretty good efficacy. And we have already in mass production the Z5M3 for about a year or two. And our newest product is the Z5M4. As a disclaimer, everything you have seen on this presentation is in mass production and has full LM80. The Z5M4 is the only difference there. We have samples, we can do mass production, but the LM80 is still pending. But everything else that you've seen, 100% ready to go for all of your certifications and sample and mass production needs. The last portion on the LED, SunLike. So SunLike, getting into the high quality of the light, there's a ton of human-centric and quality lighting available out there. It's a buzzword. Seoul Semiconductor for sure was an innovator. SunLike's been around for a few years, one of the first to have it, and it's different, okay? A lot of people now are designing their sun spectrum around single wavelengths, like 470 nanometer to 480 nanometer. Seoul, we've decided to more focus on the full spectrum. So we feel the full spectrum using a violet pump and following the actual full spectrum of the light is going to give you the highest contrast, the best texture, and in terms of human-centric, the best benefits, the most benefits as well. So we have a lot of significant university studies from prominent universities and more coming that show SunLike benefits your sleep quality, it benefits your learning and your performance, and there's visual comfort benefits as well. So again, I would say human-centric lighting and the sun has become a buzzword for sure in our industry, but not everything is created equal. Everybody's doing it a little bit different than Seoul's doing it. I think we're pretty proud of it, and a lot of the data speaks for itself. So you're going to continue to hear more about SunLike. With that being said, there is a negative to not using a blue pump. It's efficacy primarily. So we have made advancements and improvements in terms of efficacy. We do have a good 3030 lineup as well as COB lineup for SunLike, and the efficacy is constantly improving. So you can discuss that in more detail with your Seoul Semi or future rep whenever you want. But that's the L1 packages. The next portion that we're going to quickly talk about is a huge value add. It's the fastest growing segment in the United States and in the Americas. It's modules and light engines. So we pride ourselves, any module, any application, pretty much true. Don't test me because I'm sure some of you out there are pretty smart and can find a exception to the rule. But this has been one of our growing categories, primarily, as I mentioned earlier, due to the shift in the manufacturing challenges here and the manufacturing preferences, as well as Seoul being able to just be faster and many times at a better value. And again, being able to use our engineering resources versus tying something up on the customer side. So in terms of our benefit versus some of our competitors that do similar things, number one, we're not an EMS, we're not a CM. We have designs here. So we can help with your design from start to finish. We have people here that can do that. But in terms of vertical integration, we are 100% complete. So the light source, which let's call it the chip or the die, it comes from us. It can be in Korea, it can be in Vietnam. The packaging, maybe it happens in Korea, maybe it happens in Vietnam. The module and assembly, maybe it happens in Korea, maybe it happens in Vietnam. So the bottom line here is what I'm trying to get to is from start to finish, your chip, your package, and your module can come from the same building with Seoul Semiconductor. That's not possible with our competition. Not even getting into all the other details about design, help, and everything else. The fact is that our price competitiveness, our quality control, our speed, just all of the symbiotic relationship that we have is due to our vertical integration. And that is something that you're not going to get from our competition. Just to kind of prove a point in terms of the module processing, this is just a visual here. So you get a sales order, it comes in, it goes to a centralized module server, let's call it. Any one of our package locations, any one of our module locations are all pulling from the same data. So it's real time. When we get that module order, package preparation begins, as well as raw material preparation begins on the module side of the business. There's always communication. Any impact to the supply chain on either side, package or module, is communicated back and forth. We are always kept in the loop as salespeople with our customer service teams. So while nobody's perfect, while everybody has their share of supply chain challenges, Seoul is constantly implementing improvements. And because our module business is something that's constantly growing and evolving, we are putting a lot of focus in streamlining the module process. Because at the end of the day, especially if a company in the US is used to its own manufacturing facility or using a contract manufacturer stateside or even in Mexico, you're still going overseas. It can be a bit scary. We're always trying to do things to help with that and to make sure the communication is transparent, timely, and we're constantly improving that process. So what type of modules do we do? Well, pretty much anything. So, you'll see up in the top left, DC linear. This is your normal 560 millimeter to 1120 millimeter modules, Chem 3, FR4 with mid-power LEDs on them. We also put lenses on the modules as well. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our technology comes from our backlighting history. We have a lot of IP around optics related to that. This is a big trend in the industry today. If any of you have ripped open a panel that's been imported, you've probably seen 2835s underneath an optic, a peanut optic. That's something that we do. There is IP around that as well. So that's a big thing we do. The other things that we do with YCOP are pretty interesting. So we take these 1 millimeter packages and we turn them into basically scalable, customizable COBs, for example. There's a lot of flexibility there because of the size of the package and the output of the package that we can use. SMT of a YCOP can be a little strange without the proper training, which of course we support. We can help with that, but at the end of the day, it's something that we do all the time. So we're very effective at it. We also go up to level 2 and level 3, as you see on the right-hand side of your screen. So Seoul Semiconductor is not an optics company. Future Electronics, for example, has a fantastic optics line card. We're not an optics company, but it is a value add for our customers. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times we'll hear, hey, we love the YCOP, we're interested, but we've got an optics problem. Well, that's kind of where we step in to try to help with that, depending on the scenario. We can help with the optics design. We can help with the testing. We can even tool up optics. We can sell the assembly that includes everything from a heat sink to the optic. So even the driver, as I mentioned earlier, we have AC driver lineups. So there's a lot that we can do. Clearly, we are not just a board house, as you can see from these PowerPoint slides. A lot of our competition also has what they call standard modules out there. So these are kind of the one size fits all stuff that they advertise on the website and things like that. Seoul is a little bit different. We like to call them reference modules. I like to call them appetizers. Sometimes people are good enough with the appetizer, right? That's all they need. And that's fantastic. So we offer 560, 1120, millimeter, even other sizes, 279, just a variety of different reference modules. They're usually in stock at Future Electronics, for example. A lot of people will say, that's great, that fits my need, the efficacy is good, the mechanicals are perfect, etc. That's great. But a lot of times people will say, I need a tweak. I don't like the hole pattern. I need a different connector. The efficacy is okay. I just need it up, 10%. What can you do? So that's when we tweak these and we make them customizable. And that's something that we do all the time. It's not something we're afraid of, and it's something we're very good at. So while we have these reference modules out there, while Future stocks them, that's not the end of the road for us. And although we're not just a local quick turn board house, we are highly flexible in terms of our manufacturing and our capability. So we're always welcoming customized design. We are actually coming out with some new reference modules this month. They will be using our flagship 3030C YCOP 3030 mid-power, so really high efficiency, really high reliability, as well as a new lineup using our S line of 2835s. So high reliability, high performance 2835 modules. And again, these will fit some of kind of the industry standard hole patterns and dimensions that are out there. So maybe you're already using something from a competitor. More than likely, this will meet or exceed their specification, and mechanically, it'll be sound with what you're already doing. So again, we do have our reference modules, but again, for us, we also consider them appetizers. So if we understand it's not always one size fits all. And if I haven't said it enough, this stuff comes out of Vietnam. So for those of us in the US with manufacturing facilities, pretty important, not dealing with the China tariffs. Lastly, in terms of our product categories, just to touch on UV again, it's our sister company, but us as the lighting team in the United States, we kind of play the middleman between our lighting customers and our UV division. So we're highly involved with UV as well. We're all trained on it. We are absolutely in the middle of it. Again, UVA, UVC, near UV 405. We are across the board in terms of UV component. We have a great support team here. Future Electronics is also our global distributor for UV product. So it's a very cohesive relationship. It's getting a lot of traction, a lot of noise considering the pandemic environment that we're in today. So it's very important. And just to highlight what I mentioned earlier, we're a B2B product company. That's what we do. We're a component company, but we are, because of the environment, coming out with a sanitizer and a personal air purifier using our UV technology just because of speed to market. So don't be surprised if you see that out and about in some press releases over the next few weeks. So with that being said, I appreciate everybody kind of hanging in there with me. I know it was a lot, but I think I've done a pretty good job explaining to you how Seoul is positioned in terms of the new normal. I don't think any of this is rocket science. I think many of you are already well aware. I just wanted to kind of draw attention to some more of these trends and how we're able to deal with them. And I really appreciate that. I'm going to check now and see if we have any questions. And the questions are, will the presentation be available for viewing later? Yes. Copy the slide. So I think most of this is already answered. So I don't see any new questions. So if anybody has any specific questions that have not been addressed or you have not taken the opportunity to type on this call, then I welcome you to send an email to either your Seoul rep or your future rep. And that's about it. So thank you very much for everybody for joining the call, and we appreciate it.